This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor, and we were in another week of our series, The Kingdom. But before we get any further into it, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. Now, this week, Pastor Scott, it was about the mission of the kingdom. So tell us a little bit about how this plays into our lives within the kingdom.
Yeah, so the first couple of weeks of the series, we tried to build a really good foundation of the theology surrounding the kingdom. And, you know, everyone's always waiting on the practical applications, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. You know, we're always asking for that. But, we've always explained it this way. My sermon series are essentially like one really, really long sermon. Mm-hmm. And since I can't preach it all at once, I have to break it up. So I can't get to the application until after we've laid the foundation. And so that's what we're finally getting to. And so we looked at a passage from Matthew 28 that the church has traditionally called the Great Commission, which is kind of Jesus' final words to his followers and final instructions of what they're supposed to be doing between the time that he leaves at the ascension and when he comes back for his second coming, when he's going to institute the new heavens, the new earth, final judgment, eternity, and all that sort of stuff. And so Jesus pretty much starts with a promise that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him, and then he gives the disciples, and this is not just for the 11 that were there, this is for every follower of Jesus that came after as well, that we're to go and make other disciples. We're to baptize them, we're to teach them, essentially we're supposed to help them take their next steps on their faith journey, and then he finishes the whole thing with a promise that he'll be with you until the end of the age. And so the mission is the practical outworking. Like, it's not, if you just stopped after week 1 and 2, it was the reality of the kingdom and then the king of the kingdom. If you stop after that, like, you have some good theological framework for what the Bible's talking about, but it doesn't apply to your life immediately in that moment. You have to figure out, okay, because the reality of the kingdom, because Jesus is king, now what do I do? And Jesus makes it pretty clear. We go and we make disciples. This coming week, and actually in the week even after that, we're going to look at two aspects of like practicality of making disciples and what happens when we make disciples and what happens when we're discipled. But that's what we're supposed to do. So the Great Commission is essentially the mission of the kingdom, which is to go into all the world and make disciples, which, again, I mentioned it Sunday, is drastically different than making Christians. Yeah. And it's much different than making church followers or church goers. It's much different than making marginally better moral people. Like, making a disciple of Jesus or a follower of Jesus is different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved how you said that, talked about that. But let's kind of break this down and go a little deeper into it, because I know you shared that, like, a lot of times people hear that word go and they think, oh, I'll go on a mission trip. But you talked about how it is here in our home, that mission trip, if it doesn't change how we live our life here, then it's just missional vacation. And so what does it look like to go in our lives and, you know, baptize people and do that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's not necessarily, I wish I maybe would have said this clearer. We're not really asking you to add anything to your life, but rather make what you're already doing effective. Yeah. That's what it is. It's not like, we're not saying, all right, now in some instances, the Lord might be like, literally might be tapping you on the shoulders like, no, you need to go and start a nonprofit, or you need to start a ministry. For that may be the case. God might be trying to shake up your whole life.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, it's just going to look like, what are you already doing? Okay, like for my family, we're involved in baseball. That's our mission field. That's where we're trying to make disciples. That's where we're trying to have interactions with people. Again, it's not like being weird and going out to the grocery store and just finding strangers in the parking lot and seeing if I could share the gospel with them.
Right.
Some people have the gift to be able to do that.
Yeah.
That's not my gift necessarily. I'm much better at finding common ground with people through the things that our kids are doing, creating relationships with them, and then being able to talk to them about my faith, inviting them to the church or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that you need to go out and start a new program unless the Lord's specifically telling you to do that. Just look at what you're already doing. You're at the soccer field.
Yeah.
So create relationships that eventually you can talk about your faith in. You go to work. And I know everyone's like so worried about losing their job or whatnot for talking about their faith. I just think, persecution and your faith costing you something is exactly what Jesus said that you should expect. So I don't even really think I don't think you need to be like ignorant about it, but you can talk about your faith in the workplace.
Yeah.
You can talk about your faith, and if those are going to be the people that you're going to spend 40, 50, 60 hours with a week, that might be your mission field.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're not in there like trying to give them hellfire and brimstone and all that. It's just talking about the Lord and his kingdom and how it's affected you. And so just when it says go, we're not talking about something extravagant. It's just what you're already doing.
Yeah.
You're going to go, I know people that are really good about this, that I'm not a morning pop drinker. This morning I am. Mainly because I'm not allowed to have my energy drinks right now, which I'm very upset about. But I know people that are morning pop drinkers, and so they've made it their goal every morning on the way to work. They will stop at the same grocery or at the same gas station because normally the same people work the same shift. So if I'm in there every morning, then at some point I can finally get to know these people. They find out, oh, you're a Christian. Can you pray for this or whatever? And so it's not about adding stuff to your life so much as it is just making what you're already doing more effective.
Yeah.
So if you got to stop somewhere every single morning that you're going to work, stop at the same place.
Right.
And instead of keeping your head down and just taking care, try to create a quick relationship. If you go to the same Starbucks every time, try to get to know the people in there if you can. Just make whatever you're already doing more effective. That's what it looks like to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I even think about when you're going, because when you're there, at the workplace or on the soccer field, on the baseball field, whatever that looks like, a lot of times we're a different person there than who we are at church. Sure. You know what I'm saying? And so I think it even looks like simply making sure you're the same person, allowing this to really. And this kind of probably goes along with becoming a disciple, actually being discipled in your life is maybe it looks like for now, you're not having conversations with people yet because you got to get your tongue under control, right? Yeah. You got to stop cussing. You've got to stop gossiping. You've got to, do those things first so that they see that what you're saying is actually true or those kind of things kind of earlier in the week. So we talked about, but, now, when it comes to baptizing, we talked briefly about baptism, but we didn't really get to go very far into what baptism is because we have people that come from all different types of denominations of churches, and they do it differently. So if you want to kind of dig into that.
Baptism is a weird thing because it ended up being controversial in the Christian church, which it never should have been. And even to this day, if you press me on do I have to be baptized to make it to the new heavens and the new earth with Jesus, I'm not certain that we can make that case scripturally, but I will say when that conversation comes up, do I have to be baptized? Everyone always wants to go to the thief on the cross. He goes, well, if that guy's going to make it, he didn't get baptized, then I don't necessarily have to be baptized. That guy didn't have an opportunity to be baptized. If you have the opportunity to be baptized, and you understand that Jesus was baptized, You understand that his followers were baptized and that that's an expectation of his followers even to this day. To not do so, you need to come to grips with, again, if you're part of a kingdom and there is a king who says that I should do this, why are you not doing it? That's what it is.
Especially when the king has led the way in doing it. And you talked about how, like, we're followers of that. We would do the same things as they did. We would learn how they talk. Like, so if Jesus did it, like Jesus fasted, Jesus got baptized. Like, if he did it, that should be a really pretty key thing that we're like, oh, maybe I should do that too if I want to follow him.
Yeah, it's a big part of your discipleship process, because what it does, especially in a church like ours, it takes you from the back row, puts you up in front, and goes, no, I identify with this kingdom and with this king. And I want to be accountable to the people in this church for my faith journey. That's why I get baptized. That's why baptism should happen in the confines of a local church. That way people, and I don't mean in the building, I mean like with the people. Because baptism is always meant to lead you to deeper discipleship. More than anything. It's symbolic of the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and that's actually what's taking place when you give your life to Jesus. You're dying to your old self, and you're being raised to new life. So it's symbolic of that. We know Jesus was baptized. That was a really significant moment that when John the Baptist baptizes him. But it's also Israel we talked about was also, and people miss that a lot of times. They go, what? The Red Sea? Yes, the Red Sea was the baptism of Israel because, again, the prototype of salvation and what Jesus was leading us towards in the New Testament is what we saw foreshadowed in the Old Testament. So they are enslaved in Egypt. God sends plagues, kills the firstborn, kill the Passover lamb. They're set free. That's salvation. The very next thing, they have to pass through the waters of the Red Sea to come out onto the other side. Once they've come through onto the other side, now they're going to get the law, which is, if you go and continue to read Matthew's Gospel, the next thing you're going to see in Matthew's Gospel after Jesus' baptism is wandering around in the desert, and then he's going to go through the Sermon on the Mount where he goes, you've heard that it was said, but I say this. Jesus is following the same exact path in himself that Israel was following. So when they got out, they wandered around, they end up at Mount Sinai, they get the law, and they get this is how we ought to live. So there's a life-changing element that comes with salvation, baptism. Now I'm going to bring my line into alignment with how the Lord says I should live. And that's all pointing towards the promised land, which was always the reason why the promised land in the Old Testament is so necessary is that it was the foreshadowing for the new heavens and the new earth.
Right.
That it was always going to be that foreshadowing of what was to come. That it wasn't going to be a spiritual reality, it was going to be a physical reality, and so that land really mattered. And so you get that process of I'm saved, I'm baptized, I learned to live according to the ways and the will of God on my way towards what God ultimately has for me. So baptism is a key. If you have the opportunity to be baptized, so unless you're the thief on the cross, or if you're a death row inmate and you get saved the night before, and even then, sometimes maybe the prison can even make something happen for you. If you have the opportunity, you should be baptized. We should not sit here and argue, But now I told a story about Landon, my son, just to break the ice a little bit. He's 11. He doesn't want to get wet up in front of the church. I'm not certain he's there on his faith journey yet anyways. So, I am okay with kids that want to get baptized. I'm also
okay with them waiting.
I'm also very okay with kids waiting because we baptize a lot of adults here at Southridge that were baptized as kids that shouldn't have been baptized as kids because their parents were choosing for them. And I know a lot of times it feels like the kid is choosing, but mom and dad are really pushing it. I don't think it's something that has to be rushed whatsoever. Again, because I don't think, all right, if you put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ and your baptism's on Sunday, but you die on Wednesday, it's okay. You're
Yeah.
still going to make it.
Yeah.
So it's not one of those like, if you don't do this, man, you are out.
Right.
So I don't think we have to rush kids into this, even though if a kid, my sister got baptized when she was, I think, 7.
Yeah, I think that's...
And has been faithful to the Lord ever since then, by all accounts. So it does happen. I do think most kids should wait, at least until teenage years, but even teenagers, man, it's just one of those deals. But like, if you're an adult, you've been faithfully following the Lord, you need to get baptized. It's
and
okay if Landon doesn't want to do it right now.
Right.
But if you're an adult and you've been following the Lord, you need to get it.
Yeah. We've seen people really up in the ages too, like get baptized finally because they had never been baptized yet. And they're finally like, you know what? I realize I should do this. But I think, I think about my daughter, Esme, like Carter was baptized, what year? 2 years ago? I don't know. But Esme, she's just not quite there yet. She's almost too smart for her own good, and she wants to know all the things. So she's still a little confused. She keeps asking, what does it mean to be reborn? And I'm like, you mean born again? Like, so anyway, she's still stuck on that, but it's like, you know what? We're okay. Cause we know, like, she prays, she knows about Jesus and can answer a lot of questions, but we're like, we're going to wait because we don't quite think she's there yet. Even though she asked me every single time she saw me writing, putting in my calendar something about baptisms last night. And she was like, Mom, when's baptisms? And I was like, well, the next one's on March 16th. And she's like, am I going to get baptized? And I'm like, we'll talk about it. Because
Landon
we're just
actually wanted to do the river baptisms, but we were going to be off for sabbatical. And so I felt this like really awkward, like I'm supposed to be gone, but this is the first time you've ever expressed interest in finally doing this because it's in a river. It's not up inside the church.
Yeah, well, that's what Carter wanted to do it in the river, and then he got scared once he stepped in and felt all the the stuff under his feet, and it was cold and all those things. But yeah, I think I think it's fine. But Esme said, well, we'll just practice at the pool this summer. But I think in those cases, obviously, like, waiting is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think if parents have the desire to do something meaningful for their kids, child dedication is always more appropriate than a child baptism.
Yes.
Meaning, I know we do it a lot for babies, but if you got a 7-year-old and you just came to faith, it's okay to, hey, they're not, they don't need to be baptized because maybe they're not having that faith experience yet.
Yeah.
But if you've decided that you're going to raise this child in a God-honoring home, a Christ-centered home, you can have a child dedication that is meaningful, that holds you accountable for in front of your church. This is what we're going to do in our home. You can still have that moment without making the kid go through baptism whenever it's not their volitional will that actually wants that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, I've had conversations with 2 younger guys over the past couple of weeks who are wanting to get baptized, and like hearing them talk about it, you just know the difference, like when you're there and when it is your decision. And I think that's always going to be the better option because, as you said, we've seen people, like we've even had an adult male who 2 years after getting baptized here wanted to get baptized here again. And I was like, dude, no,
you don't have to do that.
So
baptism should be a once in a lifetime thing. I know there's some people that have done it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5.
Yeah.
You don't have to. Again, it's why we made baptism so weird. I don't know, but I know that there's like teaching in certain parts of Christianity, like if you're not baptized, you're out.
Or
and so
like,
we get real frantic when it comes to our kids, and we try to push them into decisions.
I mean,
and we don't need to do that.
Yeah, some churches have you, like, there are different ways to become a member there, because this was me as a kid. I was baptized a couple times before I chose to be baptized because my mom wanted to be a member of the church, and that was the easiest way because we didn't have money to give. We didn't, like, we were too old for, like, dedication or whatever, and so we just all got baptized. But it wasn't us doing it. Like,
there are churches that want you to be baptized to be part of their church, and it's just not that frankly isn't a biblical model whatsoever. But if you're the parent of a kid or a teenager, let it come to you. Like let it come to them. Like you don't need to be frantic about their eternity if it's just baptism. Let's focus a lot more on their salvation and their sanctification. And when they feel comfortable with that moment, it's okay.
Yeah.
But if you're an adult, you've been following the Lord, you need to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the next part of this is like it says in verse 20, teach these new disciples to obey the commands I've given you. And you talked about how like you need to be taught to be a disciple, but you also need to teach.
Yeah.
And how this aspect comes into play in a couple different ways. One is groups, and this is one of the things that we always tell our group, like at the start of our new group every year or every session, we're always like, listen, your participation matters so much because it might not be for you. It might be for somebody else in this group.
Yeah.
That what you have to say or your experience or the knowledge or wisdom that you have might be for somebody else who needs that. And so groups is big, but I think also serving within the local body of the church that you're a part of, because we've just had what we call lunch and learns for some of our volunteer teams. And I've gotten to hear from some of the like kids ministry team people and other things of like, they're like, you know what, like it forces me, not like in a bad way forcing, but they have the desire to want to grow and learn more because they want to be able to teach those kids in a better way. They want and so there's this aspect of like when you're on a serving team in certain environments that I think this also comes into play and grows you in a way that just coming to church doesn't.
Yeah, all of this can happen in formal environments like groups or serving, that's why we offer it. That way you can experience it. It also should probably happen in informal ways as well. Like you should just have people in your life that are pouring into you and that you're pouring into as well. Like I have people in my life that it's not my small group, but that they pour wisdom into me. I'm learning from them. Maybe they're learning from me. If not, I have other people that I'm in turn pouring wisdom into. So it happens formally inside of the church as far as groups and the structures that we have. But also informal. It can be as easy as finding someone to go have a cup of coffee with that you say, hey, you're farther down the road than I am. Can you just teach me what you know? But it seems to me that so many people are awaiting to attain like some certain level before they will start discipling other people. And it's like that's not the model that you see or any stipulation put on that. It's like when you're saved, you now have something to offer people. Other people still have stuff to offer you, and you need both sides of that coin. And so there should be a learning process. And the reason why this is so important is, my goodness, like if you're going from a purely secular lifestyle to you're trying to live the kingdom lifestyle, like do you even know what it is that's expected? Probably not. Like you probably, it was like this is the understanding that most people's understanding of what it means to be a Christian is like, well, that's the people that don't cuss and they don't drink and they don't smoke, and it's like that's not true actually. Like that's not true at all actually. Right? I remember when I got saved, early on I had a cousin come into town that I used to run around with. And his first question, he was asking me about being a Christian. He goes, so, like, does that means, like you don't cuss anymore? And I was like, no, that's not really what that means. Like, I'm going to try to not cuss, sure, as a Christian. But that's not the sum total of what it means to be a Christian. I'm gonna not cuss because I think as Christians we shouldn't violate societal norms. And it seems that there's a certain set of words that are not actually forbidden in the scriptures, but that other people find offensive. And as a Christian, I don't think that you should offend unnecessarily. So there's probably going to be someone that doesn't like that I said that, but there's not like a list of words other than using the Lord's name in vain, which we can even talk about what that means another time. That says you can't say these words. No, it's funny too, because if you go over to like a place like Britain, some of the words that we have forbidden are just like commonplace terms, even in business. Yeah, there, but stuff that they say, we say over here. So it's so silly, like this whole Puritan way of seeing morality that crept into the American church, where we're like, we don't say these words. It's like the only reason why I choose not to, and I'm going to say this whether people like it or not, publicly say those words, is because I don't want to offend someone unnecessarily, even though those words I don't think are tied necessarily. But, again, I don't think that it's a wise practice.
Right.
So it's the same thing. Like, so it's not like, oh, those are just people that don't cuss, they don't drink. He goes, have you seen what the scriptures, I have a whole sermon, how I feel about alcohol.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into it here. Same thing with smoking. It's like, those are the three things everyone thinks about. It's like, that's what you don't do if you're a Christian. It's like, what? No, we're trying to teach people a radically different lifestyle that doesn't have so much to do with stuff like that, but more about, are you kind? Are you generous? Do you treat people how you want to be treated? Like, sure, there's things that people need to know that God has said is right and wrong as well. Like, so, like, what does God have to say about something like sex? What does God have to say about something like marriage? What does God have to say about alcohol? You should know that without just blindly getting involved in it. What does God have to say about the way that I speak? You know, it's interesting. Like, there's so much more in the scriptures about gossip and complaining, things that are commonplace in the mouths of Christians, that we don't want to talk about that. We'd rather talk about the little four-letter words that you better not say or else you're not a real Christian. It's like, yeah, but you will gossip behind people's backs. You will cut them down. You will tear them down. You will make inappropriate jokes at work. But as long as you stay away from these words, that's how it's this like ridiculous religious culture. But you got to teach people this sort of stuff. Because normally we just give them, they come into Christianity and they go, don't cuss, don't smoke, don't drink, right? Don't have sex before marriage. We're going to do that one anyways, but just these three, right? These three, that's what it means to be. And it's like, goodness gracious. Or like, how does someone learn to pray if someone doesn't teach them to pray?
Right.
It's not something that comes natural to us. So there's a teaching component that we all need. And it's not just, here's the big three, make sure you don't do those.
Yeah. So you brought up prayer. In my volunteer meeting yesterday, I shared a little devotion thing about how people come to church with fears and anxieties and these kind of questions. And one of them shared, I always had the question of what I was supposed to do at the altar and how to go to the altar. He said, I felt God calling me and like I knew I should go up there to pray. He said, but because I didn't know what to do when he said, I didn't go for the longest time and I felt dumb asking somebody. So I just sat there in my seat for week after week after week before I finally did it. And I thought, how much do we just I think sometimes when you've been in church a long time or things like that, those things, we forget that there are people that don't know how to do that. Like we forget that people don't know how to take communion, that you take the juice and the little bread thing or cracker or whatever it is. Like we forget these things because we've maybe been doing it for so long. But I think it's refreshing to hear that type of stuff from people to remind us, oh, there are still people that need taught these things. Yeah. Like I'm telling the ushers, hey, there are people who might come to church and they've never been in a church that's passed an offering bucket.
They do not know that they're supposed to pass that to the next person.
And so you have to tell them what to do, instruct them in a kind manner what to do. And it feels awkward and weird, but you just have to do it. Like there are things that as you teach people, as you disciple, there are going to be times where it might feel awkward, it might feel weird and uncomfortable, but know that they probably, especially if they come to you with that question, just embrace it and answer it. But how can we help answer those questions even ahead of time, knowing this person's new to church for the first time? Okay, I need to maybe align with them and help them understand how we do some of these things, how when we call people up to pray, what that means and how to pray or all of that stuff. But I even think of teaching in the aspect of, okay, you've been married a long time. Getting together with another younger couple who's not been married as long, things like that. Because I went to a marriage conference this weekend, and one of the coolest moments or my favorite moments was when they had us all stand up and had us sit down based on the years that we've been married. And so there were several who've been married 30 plus years, 40 plus years. Yeah. And then they asked those people who'd been married the longest what kind of advice they have for those of us who've been married less time than them. And it was a really cool moment, just a really informal moment within it, that they got to share some really cool wisdom. But I think there are things like that even that is like so crucial to discipling people in the ways of Jesus and the will of God that we just forget and take for granted almost. And so,
yeah, I'm trying to find the passage. Here it is, 1 Corinthians. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 3. He says, I had to feed you with milk, not with solid food, because you weren't ready for anything stronger, and you still aren't ready, for you're still controlled by your sinful nature. There's one other area in the New Testament. It talks about how you should already be teaching others, but yet all you're doing is taking my teaching. And like this was an issue in the early church, and it's still an issue today. That we want all the information, but we don't ever feel like we're ready to start disseminating that information to other people. And we got to get this right. This is how the older generation passes along to the next generation. Really valuable lessons that we should know, like when an older married couple that's done it for 50 years gets with a couple that's a newlywed and says, this is how we made it. Those are important things that need to happen in the church. We need those connections in the church really badly, and so I hope that people will take advantage of. That's what the kingdom and that's what the community of believers has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So just take this to heart. All these things are some practical things that you can do in your workplaces, along the sports teams that you sit at every week with your kids. All of those things. Make sure that you're thinking about, praying about how God can use you in this way for you to partner with the mission of the kingdom and really help to make disciples and also be discipled. But we will be back here again next week with another episode for you and give you more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.